Hey hackers and tech enthusiasts, welcome to Protocol, the series where we unravel the history and mysteries behind the technology shaping our digital world. I'm your host Dade, and today we're going to talk about the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP. You've probably seen thousands of links that start with http:// in your time on the internet, but what does it really mean? How do pages get from the server that hosts them to my browser? And how did a simple document transfer protocol come to be one of the most ubiquitous protocols on the modern internet? Before we dive into HTTP terminology, let's get a high-level overview of what it is. In the world of HTTP, we have two main characters, the client and the server. The client is the device you're watching this video on right now, and the server is the computer that's hosting the video file and streaming it to you. In HTTP, clients make requests to the server for a resource, such as a web page, a video, a song, or a picture, and the server sends the requested file back if it has it, or otherwise informs the client that something went wrong. With the basics out of the way, let's talk about some important terms in the world of HTTP. We've already touched on two basic terms, the client and the server, but in the world of HTTP, clients also have another name, the user agent. The user agent is basically just a specific way of describing the client making a request. Web browsers are one example of a user agent, but the other examples could be mobile apps, command line utilities like curl or wget, or even automated systems like web crawlers that power Google's search engine. When a client requests something from a server, the thing it's requesting is called a resource. This is a generic term that maintains the flexibility of the protocol because a resource could be basically anything. The most common resource you're probably familiar with is an HTML document, but a resource can be any file type that you've ever heard of, or even more abstract concepts like get me the data about my user. The way we request these resources is through a Uniform Resource Locator, or URL. This is the text in the address bar in your browser, typically starting with http:// or https://. A URL is basically an address to a particular piece of information on the internet. We can use them to get resources, but also to create or modify resources on a server. The way we differentiate the type of action we'd like to do is through something called the request method. The most common request methods are GET for fetching a resource and POST for submitting data to the server. There are 9 standard HTTP methods, but other protocols have also built on top of HTTP and added their own custom methods as well. The request method is also sometimes called the verb, since many of the methods also happen to be verbs, such as get, post, put, delete, and patch. Finally, HTTP requests and responses are split up into 3 main parts. The first part is the request or response line, respectively. The request line indicates the request method, the resource name, and what HTTP version to use. The response line indicates the HTTP version, a numeric status code, and a text representation of that status code, sometimes called the reason. The next section of both requests and responses is the headers, which immediately follows the first line and contains a bunch of metadata about the request or response. This might be things like the current date, when the resource was last modified, and the type of resource. Maybe the size of the resource, or even cookies that tell the server information about your device. There are tons of different headers, some unique to requests, others unique to responses, but we don't have time to cover them here today. Finally, a request may optionally have a body depending on the request method used. The body of a request may contain information that you'd like the server to process, such as your username and password when logging in, or the contents of the comment you're trying to leave down below. The body of a response typically includes information about the resource you requested, or it may include error information if something went wrong. Now that we've covered some terminology, let's take a look at some very basic requests and responses. HTTP is a text-based protocol, which means that the control elements of the protocol are all just written out in text, rather than individual bits or bytes having special meaning. This makes analyzing the protocol really straightforward, and even lets us write our own simple clients, if we wanted to. One of the programming classes in college actually required me to write my own HTTP client, and later even my own HTTP server. For our examples, we're just going to use a tool called http://bin, which we can run locally and test out different requests and see how the server responds. Using http://bin, we can see that there are a bunch of different tools that it has built in for us that we can use to get an understanding of how HTTP works. For instance, we can test the different HTTP methods like delete, get, patch, post. We can hit the try it out button and execute a request on the get, and it will show us the equivalent curl command and then give us a response. So it says, here's the headers, here's the URL you requested, here's the response headers. And we can also go even further and we can say like, let's look at different auth methods that HTTP supports. So we might use like a bearer authorization header and we can say, okay, I want to execute, I want to make a request with the authorization header of this is an authorization header. And again, it gives us the curl output that we can use if we wanted to copy paste this into our terminal, but it also gives us the response headers and tells us some extra information. We can also do things like request inspection. So if I wanted to say, find out what my user agent was, I can just hit the execute button and it will give us back a thing that just tells us what our user agent is. And there's a lot of different things in here that you can do. You can try fetching different image formats. You can try setting and getting cookies, all of that. We're not going to cover a whole lot more with HTTP bin, but it is a very useful tool. You can run it locally, and if you're just getting kind of familiar with HTTP, I highly recommend it. As you can hopefully see, HTTP is a protocol that seems pretty straightforward, but has a lot of hidden complexity that enables its incredible flexibility. The flexibility of the protocol has no doubt played a role in it becoming one of the most prolific protocols on the web. We can and will do many more videos digging into specific intricacies of HTTP, including features like caching, authentication, a dive into different headers, and of course we'll also do videos on the more recent versions of HTTP, including HTTP 2, or the artist formerly known as Speedy, and HTTP 3, or the artist formerly known as Quick. HTTP has a ton of features for us to investigate, and I can't wait to do a whole bunch of videos on the protocol. But in the meantime, do you have a protocol you'd like to see a video on? Or maybe you want a video about a super obscure feature in HTTP? Let us know in the comments down below. If you're interested in seeing more of this series on protocols, give this video a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed so you can get notified when the next episode goes live. With that, I've been Dade, this has been Protocol. Stay curious, stay connected.